start the recording, and it seems to be going okay. Perfect. Okay. Hello, my name is Declan Golden, and welcome to the second edition of the Aspiring Youth. Here with me today, we have Dr. Simona Levi, an executive at Cell Signaling, General Counsel in legal affairs. So just for some introductions, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe name, current profession, and anything else you feel is necessary to help the audience get to know you?
Okay. Well, Declan, it's nice to be in part of this exercise, and I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to it. So first of all, you asked me about myself. So my full legal name is actually a mouthful, it's Simonetta Levi Minzi, and that leads me to why it's shrunk. I'm originally Italian, so hence the name Simonetta, which nobody can pronounce in this country. And so I decided a long time ago to simplify it and use an abbreviated version. But that's the accent you're hearing. So as part of the conversation, I am a first generation immigrant from Europe. I came from Italy, specifically from Venice. My last name is also Jewish, so I have this combination of odd backgrounds. I'm an Italian woman in science with a Jewish last name. It's a combination of a number of different pieces. I'm 55 years old. I'm the mother of two fantastic guys. And I've had the fortune of an amazing education and opportunities that I know were very privileged. I was very grateful and continue to be very grateful for that. You're muted.
Sorry, my bad. Thank you. We're going to be splitting this interview up into three sections, three principal sections, the first of which your personal journey, education, and then finally a delve into the realistic experience of your profession. And just to start off with the first section, personal journey, I have two questions in this one. The first, did you have any early interest in your profession? And when was your first experience in your line of work?
Okay, so the first question that I need to ask myself is, what is my line of work? Because I am in a very peculiar position. I'm a privileged practitioner, meaning that I have an extremely interesting job. I combine science and law. So I started down a path of science. In fact, my first desire was really to become a biochemist. And so my first degree was actually in genetic engineering as an undergraduate. And then I double majored in economics because that was supposed to be the girl's job. This was a long time ago, okay, folks? So being a woman in science was very daring. And so it was my safety net, if you will. So I majored in finance and economics. But then from there, I ended up, so I did my first 3 years at Berkeley in California. And then I moved to New Jersey, where my father was a professor at the university, and graduated from Rutgers as an undergraduate. And then I went to a master's and a PhD, both of which were in genetic engineering, or rather in biochemistry. So I was straight hardcore, very, very hardcore science, right? Because biochemistry was very rigorous. And at that time, I think I was one of 3 women that graduated in the class of biochemistry. There were more biology majors than there were biochemistry women. And I did a postdoc. So I finished my PhD in, I can't remember the year. And then I went to do a postdoc at Harvard for about a year. Our funding got messed up. This was at the time when there were very serious federal funding cuts. Money was appropriated for, efforts in space. This was a space station moment. And so unfortunately, a lot of us lost our federal funding for cancer research, which is what I was in. And so I found myself working for a company part-time to be able to pay rent and to frankly go pay for food as a graduate student, as a postgraduate student. And so I started working for a company called Millipore in Massachusetts. And I was writing the scientific writings for patent applications for a whopping $25 an hour, which I thought was so much money. I was very, very pleased with that. And I did not have to ask my parents for more money. It's kind of hard to do that after you've done an undergraduate and a doctorate. And then all of a sudden you find yourself asking, parents for money, and that just felt very wrong. So this $25 an hour job was really a desperation job, as you call them. But it turned out to be an awful lot of fun. I actually enjoyed it tremendously. And I was enjoying the fact that I could read hardcore science, and I could be on the very same papers I enjoy reading as part of my professional, development as a postdoc. But now I was getting paid. And not only that, but I could also write about the science, and they were paying me, which I thought was, hysterically funny. Nobody paid me to write papers before. It was like it was more of a duty, right, as a student. But at that point, I just got to, I was waiting for the grants to come in, and they weren't coming in, and the cuts continued, and I got very frustrated with the funding of science. And so serendipitously, I ended up working in patent work. And then one summer, my husband and I decided that we both wanted to find some alternative path. He was also a PhD in chemistry. And we both took the LSAT and the MCAT. And this is embarrassing, but it's the truth. This is how life works sometimes. We both took the exams, and we decided that we would figure out who went to which school, but we would both not go to medical school, and both would not go to law school, because we wanted to avoid the risks that, funding or jobs, security, or whatever could hit us. So it was very, very practical. And this is where it got crazy. We literally picked up a quarter coin, and we flipped it. And we decided who was going to go where based on heads or tails. And that's how I ended up in law school. And he ended up in medical school. So talking about knowing what career you want to follow, there is no such thing for me. It's been all serendipity. And I have to tell you, it worked beautifully. And so I don't know, people will tell you that they were born thinking of becoming physicians or lawyers, what have you. I just love using my mind. That I knew. And I love intellectual pursuits. I'm an introvert at heart. I really am. I work very, very hard on being an extrovert. But so to me, things just happen. And it was better that they happened that way, because it kind of led to a place where I have a job that I really, really enjoy. I spend my days reading science, and I also happen to be a lawyer, and the fact that patent licensing and all of that was very much part of my background allows me to contribute to the bench work and to the science in a completely different way. And it's through funding, and it's through deals, through licensing patents. And I love that. I love that purpose. And I think I'm probably a better person with a pen in my hands than with a piping tip in a lab. So that's how I got there.
That's a wonderful story. And in that same line of thinking, on that fantastic journey, could you pick out any figures, leadership, mentors that really were poignant? And well, obviously, you had a bit of a unique divination process of what you wanted to go into, but were there any leadership roles that you really took inspiration from, or guidance, or maybe help discerning your future?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, a very important question. So the answer is yes, two completely different people. When I was an undergraduate, a professor that was teaching of all possible classes, plant molecular biology. I just took it as an elective. I really, was supposed to be a fun class. Was this guy called Joachim Messing. Joachim Messing is a guy that became extremely famous. He and his colleague were, slated for the Nobel Prize for some very key contributions they made He invented some vectors in molecular engineering that are still being used to this day. This is them 40 years later. And him really inspired me to want more from myself and to try harder and not to let failures, at the bench failures are the name of the day, right? That's what you're breathing day in and day out. Not to let failure and disappointment drive you out of the profession, but to actually inspire you to try harder and harder and harder. His attitude towards science resonated with me. It's probably because my family is originally Austrian and German, and so there's a common discipline and sense of purpose that we shared. He was from Munich, so he was also German himself. He spoke to my heart. He really did. Unfortunately, he just died about a year and a half ago, and that was a terrible loss for me. I really cried tremendously. It was like a loss of a close relative. And then the other person that was a very important, inspiring role model, a mentor, was actually one from Wharton. So at this point, I was in law school. I went to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and I was taking courses at the Wharton School of Business as well, because I wanted to refine my finance understanding. And one day I was on the, of all possible places, on the train from Philadelphia back to New Jersey, to Princeton, where my family lived. And I sat right next to an older woman, in fact, face to face. And she was beautifully dressed, and I made a comment about her pin. And I said, that's a beautiful, fantastic pin, but that's very detailed. And we started chit-chatting, and I found out that she was actually coming back from a commemoration at the University of Pennsylvania for the first woman to graduate from the Wharton School from the get-go, from the very beginning. And I got to know her, and so I, just one of those conversations out of the blue. And over the years, she became my mentor. I got to know her pretty well. She taught me how to be a wife, a mom, and at the same time, an executive. It's a balancing act that requires a lot of attention to people and expectations, and an awful lot of love for all the different parts of your life, for your family and for your career path as well. And she was a very, very humble person, and she taught me an awful lot about that particular piece. So.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And it's definitely important to understand that while mentors in your case may have helped you find a new passion for your line of work, they also they help you in all other aspects of your life too, from being a family person, a mother, a wife, a brother, sister, whoever it may be. Yeah, that was really wonderful. Thank you so much. So for the second section, I know you already talked about it a little bit, but I want to go a little bit further. Education. So firstly, in a broad sense, what course of education did you take? I know you already went into a little bit, but maybe starting in high school and then college and then law school, I guess, and maybe elaborate on some of the educational requirements it would take to become a lawyer.
Yep. So my college was the first experience in the United States. Before that, high school was in Europe. And in Europe, you have different paths that you undertake in high school. It's a little bit different from here, meaning that there is a commitment to go into either science or the letters. That was supposed to be a letters college kid, because I went to a classical lycée. So I had Greek and Latin for some 10 years. So by the way, yoo-hoo to you guys, because I know you guys have Latin at your school. So I thought that was actually a very important piece. It was very formative. To this day, I can still translate Greek, and it makes my kids laugh hysterically at the complete lack of use for that. But actually, that's not. It's just you learn how to use your head. And you learn how to study, and you learn how to sit put for hours on end and digest conjugations of verbs and so on. So then college, as I said, college was it was really me chasing what I wanted. And that seems to be the common theme, is me chasing stuff that I'm interested in. I don't really plan things. You would think that I do, but when it comes to educational aspect and intellectual aspects of my life, I follow my heart and I follow my mind, and the rest of it follows. For some reason, it always did. And I do believe that that's the way to go. Just follow your passions, whatever they are, and they change with time. The requirements to become a lawyer have nothing to do with what I did. In fact, I overdid it, because by the time I applied to law school, I already had a PhD in biochemistry. So I had so many classes, that the GPA was high and there was no question about it. But to go to law school, you really just need an undergraduate, and you need a solid GPA. Most law schools will not take you in with a GPA of less than 3.5, 3.7, something like that. Frankly, given the job landscape, especially in the last 10 years, since it's more than that now, since 2007-8, the legal profession has changed dramatically. A lot of people lost their jobs during the financial crisis in 2007. And from then on, the legal field has really shifted a lot. So going to law school is something that you need to be very careful about, because the loans coming out of law schools are astronomical. I did not let my parents pay, even though they could have, but it was not an option for me because I was older and I felt that it was the wrong thing to do. But the loans were astronomical. I paid student loans for a very long time. So, and that's the same as medical school. My husband piled up his own debt as well. But you work, and then you have opportunities to work jobs that pay back quite a bit, and that will allow you to pay back the loans. So, don't let the financial part intimidate you. So long as you have a very high GPA, and so long as you get into a solid school. So I think that's a piece that I would advise people to be careful about. I mentor a lot, by the way. That's one of the things that I do on the side. And a lot of the kids that are having a hard time with legal jobs are kids that went to schools that were not as highly respected. And so now they're struggling to find jobs, and they're working as paralegals instead of as lawyers. And so one has to be very, very careful. You either have the grades and you go down that path, or think of it very carefully, because it's the financial burden is dramatic. Law school itself is not that long. It's 3 years. The first year is very intense. A lot of the programs make decisions as to whether you cut it or not after the first semester. It's something called, there's a way of teaching in law school, which is extremely hard for most American kids to get used to. I was lucky, because that's the way they teach in Europe. And so I was very comfortable with the directness of being called on out of the blue by name in front of 300 people in an amphitheater, where there is a camera pointed at your face and everybody sees you nice and big while you make a complete joke of yourself by giving the wrong answer. This is Socratic method, by the way, I'm referring to. So, if you want to become a lawyer, you need to be very comfortable with confrontation. You need to be comfortable with being put on the spot. You have to be comfortable about being able to think on your feet. That's extremely important. Long hours, incredibly long hours of studying in law school. And the job is not that different, actually. But so you must like the challenges of thinking, of the dialectic of different argumentations, of looking up things, or doing legal research. It's very research driven in case law and statutory, etc. Writing, English courses, highly recommend learning how to write well. It's one of the things that I find most disappointing in young students coming in as lawyers. Over the years, of course, I've been overseeing a number of people. It is disappointing to see how many kids come in that don't really have a good command of the English grammar, and their writing is just very painful. It is more common than one would like to think.
Yeah. Well, you've actually jumped ahead and answered a bunch of my questions, but just to go a little bit further into when you were talking about the sort of experience in law school, you mentioned the Socratic method being called out and maybe make a fool of yourself every now and then. But with that in mind, what are the teachers like? Are I remember in previous interviews, a lot of my subjects have had some opinions on their teachers, specifically some differentiations made between different fields. What are the people like? What are your fellow peers? Are they extroverts? Are they introverts? Is there any generalization you can make? And the last question was, which you partially addressed. The level of rigor, obviously, yeah, you have to spend a lot of time studying, but is there sort of a light at the end of that tunnel for studying, would you say?
Yes. So I'm going to answer the last question first.
Yeah, sorry, that's
So
my
the
bad.
answer
That's a
is
lot of
yes.
questions.
Yes. So the answer is yes, because what happens is that you learn to study in an intelligent way. So you learn that even if the professor assigned 300 pages for the night and you find yourself having to technically read 300 pages, you learn very quickly that a good use of $25 is to go and take a course on speed reading at the local community college during the summer so that you can actually zoom through 300 pages because we're not actually reading them. You're just reading the beginning of each paragraph and you're skimming through it to figure out whether you should read the whole thing. So the light at the end of the tunnel comes in the form of you learning how to be a lawyer, how to review a lot of documents relatively quickly, because you learn how to skim through them to find the one that really matters, and then you stop and you actually read it. But you learn how to. It's like you guys gaming, right? I mean, these days I see my kids gaming around the clock, and I love that. I mean, I try to learn some of the games, but I will never learn to be as fast as my guys are on a computer. And I tried. There was a moment when I was, desperately trying to figure out how to be a good gamer. But the bottom line is that you learn only through a lot of experience and a lot of thumbing back and forth and a lot of keyboarding. That's the kind of skills that you learn as a student. It's just different thing, but it's the same thing. It's just you're educating your mind, your brain to operate in a different way. And those are extremely valuable skills. And by the way, I think gaming is a great idea. Just my own opinion.
Thank you.
But so professors, you asked me about professors. I had some great professors, and then I had some real impressively disappointing ones. I think that's part of the course. I think the professors that are most disappointing, I'm going to start on the negative side, are the ones that are turned off. So in other words, the ones that have experienced disappointment at some point in their career, and they're not passionate about their teaching. I don't care when one is paid. One, can be paid a fortune and still not find passion in what they do. And vice versa, you can have people that are extremely poorly compensated, but they're just incredibly invested into what they do. The passion seems to be the driver of how a professor comes across and how they can inform you and really excite you about what you're doing. The toughest professors, the best professors were very often the toughest ones, the one that I wanted to strangle, and I would have loved to have a gun at their head sometimes. But those are actually the ones that you learn from the most, and they really make your life miserable. But there is a reason why they do that, is because they're trying to get to you, and they're trying to get you to think in a different way or to do things in a different way. My legal writing professor was one of the most painful one. She would take points. I was an older lady. We thought she was absolutely insane. She would take points off because of a comma in the wrong part of the sentence. And she had, there's something called blue booking in law, which is how you annotate a document. And now I know you guys are using those in history, where you have to give proper credit to a source, and it has to be a primary source, a secondary source, and so on. Blue Booking takes that to a whole new level, by meaning that not only the rules are very specific and very non-forgiving, but they're also jurisdiction specific. So if you're writing a memo in Massachusetts, it's completely different from the rules in the Blue Book for Texas. And this woman will literally, the night before, tell you that you needed to provide a specific memorandum by 8 o'clock the morning after in 17 different jurisdictions. It's just a waste of time. But what you learn by doing that is essentially you learn to be neurotic, right? You learn to be very, very detail oriented. And that's what she was trying to teach us, to be extremely careful. So good teachers.
Yes. Yes, I think everyone has their fair share of teachers that are good, teachers that are bad, but I do definitely agree with you. Sometimes the teachers that may seem bad, the tougher ones that give you all the work, they have to, because that's what the course requires and that's what the material requires. And yeah, it's nice to be able to look back on that and see the actual benefit that you get from it. It definitely gives hope to people who are like in the thick of it currently. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But
Yeah.
you know, it's part of the course, right? Because that way you
It's
can go
definitely.
out and, yeah, I mean, there's nothing like going out with a whole bunch of law students and getting wildly drunk, you know, talking about all the horrible things about the professor and, you know, how, you know, you despise a particular assignment. And then, you know, the next time around, you don't even expect it, but the professor's actually sitting at the same table, drinking the same beers with you. And so you become one of them, and, you know, they
Yeah.
accept you. You know, there's a rite of passage involved.
Yeah. That's really special. That's a special perspective. Yeah. So let's move on to the last section. The realistic experience. So I really enjoy this one because this is sort of like the pinhole view into a real profession, which is really fascinating for anyone who's excited about their future career. So the first question I have for you, as a general counsel for a cell signaling biotechnology company, what does your average day look like? And so again, that's a really broad question, but how I'd ask you to answer it is like maybe summarize what you do in the morning, what's your morning routine, then maybe what do you do at lunch? Do you have lunch with colleagues? Do you have meetings? And then what do you do to finish up the day? What kind of work is
All
done at
right.
that time?
Okay. I love these questions. So Declan, I'm answering that in a time of a pandemic, right? This is when we're recording this. So it's a little bit different from what it used to be. So I'm just going to put some variations in there. So these days, because my company has expanded its market in China, so I oversee the affairs for the entire company worldwide. So I have attorneys in the US, then I have attorneys in Japan, then I have attorneys in Europe, in the Netherlands. And now we have a subsidiary in Shanghai as well. Right before the pandemic, January 20th, I went to Shanghai for 3 weeks. So while the pandemic, literally the flight landed at Logan, and it was one of the last 10 flights coming in from China. After that, they blocked it. So it was that close to it. So I had gone to Shanghai to essentially establish a subsidiary for our sales in the country, where, you know, they already grown over a certain volume. So for the past year, I've been getting up at 4 a.m. every day because I have to work with China. So I'm on a Chinese time zone schedule, which is 13 hours difference. So I actually do 4 days a week in China and 1 day in Europe and 1 day in Japan. So as a result of that, because of the time zones and because also I raised two boys, you know, through schooling and breakfast and all that, I kind of turn my day upside down. My day starts at 4 a.m. and I then stop around 6:30 and take a couple of hours to attend to my duties as a mom, and then I go back again. So it starts with Zoom calls, just like this one. Usually it's with counsel on the opposite side, or with our own team in Beijing or in Shanghai. And then when I'm done with that, I get a cup of coffee. I just try to relax. And now I flick to the US side, right? So now I have a team of 6 attorneys that work in the US. They're reporting into my office, and we take care of the sales for all of the US and all of the R&D for the US. So we have an awful lot of biotechnology, right? Inventions, intellectual property work that we need to do. We have sales of products. We sell reagents. We also have, obviously, some situations where we are enforcing our own IP. So we have some litigation going on, any human resource issue, labor contract, even things like the cleaning company that cleans the office, it all comes through my office, right? And so I have a number of people that specialize in different areas of the law. I am still stuck very much in the world of licensing because I love the science, and so I want to keep on doing that work because it allows me to read papers and allows me to keep up with the immunology. The rest of the day pretty much follows the US. An awful lot of back-to-back phone calls, guys, these days, because everything is done through Zooms, or we use another platform, Google Meet, but essentially an awful lot of work is now in front of a camera, which is not easy. My heart goes out to you guys because I think the world does not appreciate how much kids hurt as a result of the number of hours you have to stay in front of classes on a computer. And then on top of that, all of your homework these days are foremost online. So I understand that, guys, because I do the same thing. And I'm a 55 years old, lady, but and I'm used to sitting down. I don't think it's a natural state for a teenager. That's just my view. But then the rest of the day pretty much ends around 7 o'clock at night. It's when my day stops. And it's like that pretty much every day of the week, except for Saturday and Sunday, where I usually spend my day on Sunday mentoring. So I do an awful lot of pro bono with kids and in science and in law, not as much though. I seem to be driving an awful lot of mentoring through the Museum of Science, which is this association called WISE. So that's what I do on Sundays, which is Women in Science and Engineering. That's my Sunday project. So that's that.
You are incredibly busy. That is
Yeah.
impressive. And thank you for your sympathy. Yeah, it's difficult, but what you do, that kind of puts it in a little bit of perspective. A little bit of an off-tangent question. I was just curious. During the pandemic, coronavirus, as a biotechnology company, what role do you guys have in prevention, fighting, anything? Well, what are you doing?
We had an opportunity to really contribute, and I have to tell you, it felt fantastic. So we're a company that makes reagents. So in other words, we make some of the reagents that company use for diagnostics. So for cancer, our area is lung cancer, and so we design antibodies. It's an immunology company, right? And so we design them from scratch. And we make the antibodies that are the best in class. So where you can find antibodies against a certain target made by other companies, our company antibody is always the best. And we do that on purpose. We throw away 80% of the antibodies we make because they're not good enough. We license them out to other people. They can do what they want with them. But the ones that we do keep, we test them ad infinitum. So what you end up with is an antibody that it's very well known, very well understood, and it's also being validated across different type of platforms so that you can use it in different modes. Companies buy our antibodies to do diagnostic testing in cancer. So when COVID happened, we literally shut down a number of laboratories, not forever, but temporarily, and converted them into COVID spike protein labs. So we started working around the clock on making antibodies to the different proteins in, those things that show in the pictures as red little mushrooms coming out of the virus.
Mhm.
Okay, so those are just totally artificial, right? Those colors don't really exist. But those proteins are called spike proteins, and that's where all of the vaccines are reacting to. And there are so many different domains on the spike proteins that at the beginning, it was very important to create a library of all the possible epitopes and all the possible permutations, and so that you can make the best possible antibodies, right? And so it was really a combination of millions of possible permutations of the proteins. And so we work very closely with a number of companies, including Moderna, that is a client. I can say that because it's actually out there. And Pfizer is our number one client. And so we work with them as well. So it was really awesome. So we made spike protein antibodies till I don't know how many thousands of permutations we made. And then we let the companies pick the one they wanted, right? Because they had the human samples. We cannot touch them, of course. But they had the ability to select which ones made the most sense from a diagnostic point of view, but also to make the drugs. And so we are still working very actively on those as well. So it's fun. I mean, it has purpose. You see my point.
Yeah.
You're making something that makes a difference in people's lives. And the quicker we could do the licensing, the better, right? So talking about what I do as an attorney, I lead a team, and I have two particular attorneys that are really good IP attorneys. They're very seasoned. And we needed to put contracts in place to get these projects going like that. Literally, there was a moment when we were drafting documents and trying to close them in less than 24 hours, because it was very important to put the material in the hands of the scientist and get going. So in other words, no time no time to be wasted, right? Because people's lives were at stake. So that felt incredibly invigorating. And right now we're still working on drug development for therapeutics for COVID. So that's very nice. It feels good. It makes sense.
Yeah, you really are the double threat. Yeah, it must be, I wouldn't say a rarity, but certainly an asset for cell signaling to have someone who's versed in what they do as well as law. Yeah, it's kind of insane, like to have a PhD in biochemistry as well as a law degree. It's like a double whammy.
I'm telling you, I'm telling you, don't try to chart it. Just follow your heart. Whatever your mind and your heart desires, it's hard work. But if you follow that, you'll be happy, and you can make a big difference in other people's lives.
Yeah, I mean,
it's really
that's
the
sage
only
advice.
advice I can give you guys.
Yeah.
Is just really follow your passion and don't follow the money. Don't, for God's sake, don't make that mistake, because I think that's silly. But
Yeah,
I think that's a recipe for unhappiness in my view. But that's me.
yeah. Okay, one last question. I just wanted to ask what your favorite and least favorite part of your job. And I include this section because we as young people, we need to accept the good with the bad. And not everything in our future careers will be easy and bearable. And it's important to sensitize ourselves to the bad so we're prepared for it. So go ahead.
This is excellent questions, by the way, Declan. All of them are. So the best part of my job is the science and the access, the combination of science and law. I love that. I love when I'm reading patent law and why it's in a certain way in one jurisdiction versus another, and how does that translate for a specific, project scientifically. To me, that piece is fantastic. I love the legal research that goes into doing that, or the scientific research. Sometimes I'm on PubMed, and 10 minutes later, I'm on Westlaw. And it's just because I'm trying to understand how does the case law decide something, and how does that translate scientifically, and how can I combine these two things? How do they work together, right? That's the part I love. And so that's uncharted, unknown waters, navigating. There's a litigation that we're in right now where I think we're going to end up making case law. So that's like a completely new path, right? The exact opposite is the piece of my job I hate. And I don't dislike it. I really hate it. It's the repetitive nature of some aspects of it. Like you do the same thing over and over and over again. I think it comes with being a middle-aged woman that has now reached a point in a career where you kind of have done it, and you're up there, right? So you're leading a whole bunch of other people, But what you do also includes some very repetitive things, and it's part of the business, right? It's what you need to do, and there is only so many master supply agreements I can possibly stomach, but yet that's what makes the revenue. That's what allows us to fund the laboratory and the science. That's what allows us to be where we are. So guess what? There are master service agreements that will keep on coming, and thank God they're coming, because that's how the revenues are generated, and that's how we can continue to support some 700, 800 families around the world. So with each MSA comes a little bit more of a humble pie piece to eat. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really interesting to hear about your story in particular. You are a truly amazing person. Thank you for your time.
Oh, Declan, thank you. I think it's amazing that you guys are going through this exercise. It's very clever that you guys are doing that, especially these days.
Thank you.